What is going on, guys? Welcome back to another video. This video is for guidelines on the stat sheet for beginners. So it's just a general sort of where you should be at with each sort of number on the stat sheet. So this is more of a sort of a beginner for PvP, but also people that need a refresher and maybe being a little bit confused with, say they're making a build and they need to know sort of, is that correct? Is that in the right sort of area, you know, of where the numbers should be? So it's all about just the basics of the stat sheet. So we'll start off with the Magicka, health and stamina. So as you can see on this particular character I've got, the health is around the 32k mark, stamina's around 20, and the Magicka's around 20. So that is ideal, I think, for a perspective of a general 2-bar build or even a 1-bar build. You know, the minimum your health, ideally, unless you're ganking, of course, I think is you want to be around between 28 to say 32k is sort of like the basic average range for health. So anything under that, you know, you can be possibly ganked a lot easier. So people generally aim for around, I'd say, the 28 to 32k range. And with the Magicka and stamina, if you're using, say, Smoke Bear Haunch or Jewels of Misrule, which most people use for sustain on PvP builds, I would recommend the minimum your Magicka and stamina to go is around 19 to 20k each. I wouldn't go any lower because you might run into sustain issues and problems. So generally I would say the range for the Magicka and stamina is around, say, 17 to around 20k or 21k for the Magicka and stamina each. So you want to be in that sort of range. With the Magicka recovery, health recovery and stamina recovery, the health recovery doesn't really matter anymore because most people are running vampire, so you won't really have any health recovery. So if you're running a PvP build, 9 times out of 10 you're probably running a vampire, unless of course you're a werewolf. But most people run vampire for the undeath passive, which absolutely kills your health recovery. So really this is one of the few stats on the character sheet you can actually ignore almost. So health recovery is just very diminishing when you have at least stage 3 vampire, which most people are, like I said, for the undeath passive, which will make you tankier. So health recovery can basically be ignored. And then there we go to the Magicka and stamina recovery. With a general, again, this is like a general 2-bar PvP build. You know, even 1-bar, but 1-bar is a little bit more forgiving because there's less buffing. So you won't be pressing, you know, say something for major resolve constantly or armor. But I would say the guidelines are the minimum you want to be for Magicka and stamina recovery is probably about 1500 each, upwards to about 2 to 2.5k is the sort of ideal range. So between 1500 and 2500 is the ideal range. And like I said, if you've got a 1-bar build, you can get away with a little bit less, say about 1300. You can probably knock off, say 200 stamina and Magicka recovery, because like I said, there's less buttons to keep pre-buffing, so your sustain is a little bit more forgiving. So that's we've done the Magicka, health and stamina and the 3 recoveries. So we're going to move on to your spell damage and weapon damage. Right, so spell damage and weapon damage, they don't actually matter anymore. It just scales, your damage will scale off whatever one is higher, either weapon damage or spell damage. It doesn't matter. So if you've got one higher than the other, it makes no difference. Your damage will automatically scale because everything was hybridized. So your damage will scale off also your stats as well, your Magicka and stamina, and also your weapon and spell damage. So whichever one's higher, it will just automatically choose that. So obviously the higher the weapon damage and spell damage, the harder your abilities, light attacks, heavy attacks, etc. are going to hit. So again, generally I would say an average, you don't really want to be below about 4k, 4.5 to 5k is probably the absolute minimum when you're like buffed up. Obviously you can go lower, say if you're running a super high stat build like a sorcerer, you know, running 50k magicka, then you can have less spell and weapon damage, because obviously you're getting your damage from another source, which is the actual stat sheets. But for a general build, I'd recommend not going lower than about 5k. You know, between 5 and 7k is the reasonable sort of spot for weapon and spell damage. Now, spell critical and weapon critical. This is your percentage chance on how often you're going to crit. Crit will do bonus damage to your hits. So again, if you're running a high crit build, obviously you want to be getting this percentage basically as high as you can without affecting your other things. Like I said, it's all about balance. But I would recommend probably, I wouldn't go lower than about 27% maybe, just so you've got like a third chance, third chance of getting a critical hit. Obviously if you get up to 50%, then every hit you've got a 50% chance of getting, say, a critical hit. So yeah, I'd go the range, yes, I'd say it's 27 to probably about 45 is probably the okay range. So I'm doing just sort of, you know, general for PvP, 2-bar and 1-bar setup, so I'd aim to be there, just so you're getting some critical damage. Obviously if this is too low, you're never going to crit, and you know when it's going to crit, it comes up yellow numbers instead of whites. So you want to be generally critting, yeah. I wouldn't go lower than about, say, 27 for a general build in PvP. Now, and again with the spell and weapon critical, they will just it will scale off whichever's highest, and they also mix as well, so you could have spell damage and weapon critical. If they're your two highest stats, they will pull from them, so don't worry, they cross over. It's all hybridized. Same with the spell penetration and physical penetration. So this is basically denting through people's armor. So really you can just subtract. This is just subtraction from people's armor. So you can see my spell resistance and physical resistance 20,017. So basically that penetration will subtract. So my physical penetration says 4456 and the physical resistance is 17298. So you'd basically be taking that 4,000 off that 17,000 there. And obviously the idea is to get the penetration as high as someone's resistance, basically, if you can. Obviously it's difficult, so you won't, I think obviously there might be a cap on how much pen, but I'm not sure. I think you can just get the pen as high as possible. Obviously, again, with guidelines, the stat sheet might not show the debuffs. So again, if your physical penetration is only, say, I think the minimum you want it on the stat sheet is probably about 7. Because really the ideal range on the stat sheet is to be, say, about between 7 and 15 is absolutely fine, because you will get it from other sources like minor and major breach, which won't show on stat sheets. So in that push you into the 20k region. So if someone's running, say, 30k health, you're going to drop them down to 10k resistances. So I think penetration is a little bit more trickier to deal with, because you will get debuffs that do not show on the stat sheet, like I said. So but I would say, don't want these 0 by any means, unless you're running an actual pen build, say with corrosive, but like, again, for a general 2-bar or 1-bar PvP build, I'd recommend these to be no less than about 6 or 7, and obviously up to about, say, 14, 15 is sort of the average. And then again, if you've got any major or minor breach sources, they will go much higher. But on the actual, the numbers you see on the stat sheet, that's the guidelines. So spell resistance and physical resistance, this is how much armor you have. The cap is at 33,000 for spell and physical resistance, around that sort of number. I think it's 33,300 for both. You can go beyond that, because obviously you will get debuffs. You might get debuffed with major and minor breach. So, but you can't get any more armor reduction than 33,300. Around that number, it will give you 50% damage reduction. So if you go higher, all that's going to do is obviously reduce the debuff on you. So say if you did have your spell and physical resistance around 33k, if someone hit you with major breach, that's going to take 6k off your physical and spell resistance. So it's going to drop you to say like 27. So obviously, again, spell and physical resistance, I would recommend them to be no less than probably say 24, 25k physical and spell, and obviously all the way up to ideally 33k if you can. But again, it's not easy, but that's the sort of general range you want to be. Between about 24 to say 33k is the sort of general resistance range. Now critical resistance, that's reducing your critical damage taken. Obviously a lot of people run strong builds with high crit damage, so make sure your critical resistance, really you want it above 2k. Between 2 and 3k is the ideal sort of range. I wouldn't bother going beyond about 3.5k because I think it has diminishing returns. I could be wrong, but I just would generally say between 2 and 3k critical resistance is absolutely fine. So again, you know, with the attributes on the side, I've got 38 into health and 26 into stamina. I'll just basically move them about until I get into that sort of range for the magic, health and stamina, and you just play about with everything else until you get in them sort of guideline ranges. You know, changing the munders, changing the armor. Obviously, whatever race you are, you fit your need to it. Obviously, you know, if you're a null, you might not need as much physical and spell resistance, so you can push more into damage. You just change to whatever you are running. But yeah, that's basically the general character sheet. I will go into the advanced ones in another video, but this is just the general stats and general guidelines. So we'll do a quick summary. So the magicka and stamina, try and get around the 20k mark, you know, give or take 3 or 4k. You know, the health around the 30k mark, give or take 3 or 4k. Magicka and stamina recoveries, you know, around the, say, the 1500 to about 2.5k. Health recovery, basically ignore. Spell damage, just try and get over, you know, like 5k-ish, you know, between 5 and 7k on the weapon and spell. And spell critical, weapon critical, try and get them over, say, 27% to around, you know, like 45 is sort of the ideal range. Physical and spell penetration, try and get them above, you know, sort of 7k, you know, on the stat sheet itself, and obviously you'll get other debuffs on the enemy. And then with the spell resistance and physical resistance, again, you really want them over, say, 26k, 25k to about 33 is the ideal range. And the final one, critical resistance, between 2 and 3k is absolutely fine. So there you go, guys, that's the end of the video, and that was the summary. I hope this video has helped like beginners or people that are just making builds and need a quick little refresher. Or hopefully even some veteran players might have learned a thing or two. So drop this video a like, and if you've got any questions, drop them in the comments section, and I'll see you in the next video.